Hey everybody, Rob here at eTrailer.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Stealth Hitches Hidden Hitch on our 2019 Volvo V60. Now actually right now we do have our hitch in place. It's a really nice thing about the Stealth Hitch. When we don't want to use it, you're not going to see the hitch at all. It's completely hidden. It's not even going to have the receiver tube sticking out. Everything is completely hidden behind the bumper, including the wiring. So whenever we're not towing, there's nothing that's going to be distracting or taking away from the looks of our Volvo. Now where we do want to tow a trailer, we have a ball mount that's going to hook into our hitch. Now the way this is going to work is if we look underneath our Volvo here, we'll see that we have this rubber plug on this silver block. We're going to pull that plug out, and in ours it actually has the keys still inside. So I'm going to grab the keys and come to the driver's side. We're going to pull that dust cup off. You can see the locks right there. We just want to take our ball mount, we're going to line it up, push it in. You can see it locks it in place. And just come to the side, push that lock in, put our dust cap on, and now we're ready to hook up to our trailer. And taking it out is going to be just as easy. Put the key in, and turn the key, and then on the passenger side we're going to have this large lever. If we turn that lever, it'll unlock the receiver and we can drop the ball mount out. Now our ball mount is going to allow us to hook up to a trailer and tow it, but you want to make sure that you're within the weight capacity and we don't want to exceed the ratings for our hitch. Now, the hitch is going to have a 500-pound tongue weight. That's going to be the downward force at the end of the ball here. It's also going to have a 6,000-pound gross trailer weight rating. That's how much the hitch can pull, but that does include the trailer and the load we have on it. So with those numbers in mind, you do want to check your Volvo's owner's manual because we don't want to exceed the weight ratings for our car. Now if you are towing a trailer, you need a spot to hook up your safety chains. Now on most hitches, the safety chains would be right below the end of the receiver tube, but on ours, since everything is really nice and hidden, they're actually right at the bottom of the bumper, just tucked in a little bit. Now it's a little bit tight of a spot, but if you have most normal size hooks, you can see there's still plenty of room to get them hooked on, take them off. We don't have to worry about interfering with too much. Now if you have some really large oversized hooks, there's still some room to get it in there. Just be mindful because it is pretty close to that plastic panel and it can be a little bit of a tight fit to get them in and get them out. Now if you're towing a trailer, obviously you need wiring as well because we need to have all of our signals when we're going down the road. What's really nice about the Stealth Hitch is the tow package is going to come with everything you need. You're going to get the hitch, the ball mount, as well as wiring. That way we can hook up our lights and be safe and legal going down the road. Now it is going to provide us with a 7-way RV style connector. So we'll have all of our light functions like our left turn, right turn, brake signals, and tail lights. But we're also going to have a 12-volt power source back here and the option to hook up our reverse lights and a brake output signal if you have a brake controller. Now I know all of us don't have a 7-way on our trailer. It is going to be one of the most common connectors, but another really common connector is a 4-way flat. And Stealth Hitches realize that, they know that, so they actually provide you with a 7-way to a 4-way adapter, so that way if your trailer only has a 4-way on it, we can still plug in the adapter, and then we can plug our trailer connector in right here. You know, there's a lot of times where we may not want to necessarily tow a trailer, but we want to take some friends with us and we want to go on a bike ride. Maybe just go to the park with some family or friends, or potentially if we're going on a road trip and we need as much room on the inside of our Volvo as possible, well, we want to be able to use a bike rack or a cargo carrier. Well, it's also going to come with a receiver that's specifically made for bike racks or cargo carriers, and it's going to slide in just like the ball mount did. It'll lock into position, and it'll give us that 2-inch by 2-inch receiver tube, so you easily put a bike rack or cargo carrier back there. Now I do want to mention a few things. Our receiver tube is not meant for towing, so you don't want to put a ball mount in there. However, you can put a bike rack or a cargo carrier directly in there, and it is going to accept just a standard 5/8 pin and clip. Now, since it's not meant for towing, they only are going to give you a tongue weight rating for the receiver tube, and that's still going to be that 500 pounds. So to put that in perspective, we'll really be able to carry quite a few bikes with us, maybe 4 or 5, possibly even 6 bikes or really maximize the carrying capacity of those really large cargo carriers. Another thing I want to mention is this receiver tube does give you that 2-inch opening, which is pretty common, and it's really going to give you the most variety of options when it comes to accessories and bike racks like that. However, a lot of us have smaller cars, may have a smaller hitch on there, a class 1 or 2, that'll have an 1.25" by 1.25" receiver tube opening. So instead of having to find an adapter for that, Stealth Hitch actually has an 1.25" receiver tube sold separately that you can get if you have another vehicle in your family that you may want to use that 1.25" shank. But again, it is going to be a separate item, but you can find it here at eTrailer.com. Being able to remove the ball mount and the receiver is really nice, but it does leave us with somewhere to put them once we're done towing. Now, I recommend picking up the storage case for the Stealth Hitch because it's going to hold all the pieces inside securely, and it's just a really nice case, to be honest. On the inside, it's going to have foam that's all pre-cut out, so our ball mount and our receiver tube will fit right in there, and we don't have to wonder where we put it, where the keys are, or anything like that. We just keep it in the back hatch by our spare tire, and it'll be ready for us whenever we do want to tow. Now, one thing I know a lot of customers are going to be wondering about is if the hitch is going to interfere with the rear liftgate sensors. And I'll let you know right now, it's not going to, but obviously we can't put our foot where the receiver tube is, so we're going to have to move to either side. But once you do, the liftgate's still going to work just like normal. It'll open up, and the receiver tube or the ball mount aren't going to get in the way. Now, I'd like to give you a few measurements, and these are going to help you whenever you're looking for accessories for your new hitch, like a bike rack or a cargo carrier for the receiver tube opening. Now, you'll notice that our receiver tube actually sticks out past the bumper, but the hitch pin hole is just slightly in from the outer edge. There's about 2 inches of difference there, so you just want to make sure that if you're looking at folding accessories, that the shank has at least 2 inches so that we can put them in the upright stored position and not make contact with the rear bumper here. Another thing to keep in mind is our V60 sits a little low to the ground. It's not extremely low, but a raised shank on a bike rack or a cargo carrier would definitely help out, give us a little bit more ground clearance so we don't have to worry about bottoming out as much. Overall, I really like this hitch. It definitely serves the purpose of being able to tow and use other accessories with it, but at the same time, when we're not towing, it gives you the cleanest look possible. People won't even know you have a hitch on your car until you're actually using it, and that's the way most of us want it. We don't want a big bar or even a receiver tube hanging out the back. We bought our car because we like the way it looks, and we really don't want to change a whole bunch of things about it, so I think this definitely fits that bill really well. Now, I know a lot of customers do get a little bit concerned when it comes to wiring. It is not a plug-and-play system. We are going to have to tap into our Volvo's wiring, but I will say the instructions are very well written. They tell you where and how to test everything. In fact, let's go ahead and show you how we got the hitch in place and how we tested all the wires, and we'll show you how we made all those connections so you can have the confidence to do it at home. To begin our installation, we want to open up the rear hatch on our Volvo, and if we come to the very corner, right below our taillight where the hatch opens, we're going to find a push pin on each corner. Now, we need to remove those, so we can grab a flat blade screwdriver, and if we look at the push pin, there's going to be an outer ring and a center section. So that little center section actually needs to get pushed in, so we'll take our screwdriver and just want to push, it'll kind of pop in there, and then we want to come underneath and pry the push pin out. Now, the one on the other side is going to work the same way, so we'll go over there and pop that center section in and pop the push pin out. Next, we can move to the rear wheel well. Just inside the liner here, right behind the tire, we're going to have several screws that are going along the edge. It should be a total of 5 of them. Now, they're Torx bit heads, so we want to use a T25 Torx bit, and I recommend using a small driver like this just because of the limited space between the tire and the liner itself. But we want to pull all 5 of those out. We'll pull all 5 of them out on this side. We'll move over to the other side and pull the 5 out over there. And with all the screws removed, we want to grab the liner, kind of push it out of the way for now, kind of catch it on the tread of the tire, and if we look right where the fender meets the fascia, we're going to have that body seam right here. On the inside behind the liner, we're going to have another torque screw that's going down. So the head of the screw is going to be on top. And it's going to be that same T25 Torx bit. It's a little difficult to see, but it's right inside the liner, right where the fender meets the fascia. But we need to pull that out. So we'll use that same driver and pull that bolt out. Now if we move to the back underside of our Volvo, just the inside of where our exhaust is, we're going to have two screws. They're going to be on each side. We need to pull those out as well. We're going to use that same T25 Torx bit. So at this point, I recommend getting an extra set of hands so we can remove the fascia. It's not very heavy, but we don't want to scratch it. So we're going to start at the very bottom where the fender meets the fascia, and we're going to start pulling away. We'll start releasing the clips. And once you get to about this area, you may need to grab underneath. And start working it loose. However, we are going to have an electrical connector on the passenger side. It's going to be a large connector. It's directly underneath the taillight all the way on the passenger side. You just push in on the tab. And disconnect the connector. Then we can set our fascia aside where it won't get damaged. So with the fascia out of the way, that's going to expose the bumper beam and the plastic support that's on top of it. So we're going to grab a 8mm socket, and we're going to remove the 4 bolts that are holding that plastic retainer in place. Once you have all the bolts removed, we'll set this plastic piece aside. Now that that plastic support's out of the way, that'll give us room to see and get access to the 3 nuts on each side that are holding the bumper beam in place. We'll have 2 on top and then 1 in the center on the bottom. So we'll grab a 15mm socket and pull all 3 of those out. With all 6 removed, we'll grab our bumper beam. You may have to lift up just a little bit. Might be stuck. We'll grab it and pull it off and set it aside for now. So now we can grab our hitch. We're going to line up the holes on the side plates with the holes in the studs. One thing you do want to pay attention to is that the holes in the center here need to be on the bottom side of the hitch. Now we can grab our bumper beam and we're going to put it right over the studs, sandwiching the hitch in between the body and the bumper beam. So we don't want to reuse the factory nuts. They give us new serrated nuts in your kit. So you just want to take one of the nuts, put it on each one of the studs, making sure everything's nice and secure. And if we get one on each side, at least hand tight, we don't have to worry about anything falling, and everything should support itself and hold it in place. So just go through, put all the nuts on each one of the studs. Then we can take that same 15mm socket and we're going to tighten up all the nuts till they're nice and snug. Now you do want to make sure you come back with the torque wrench, and we're going to torque all the hardware down to the specified amount in the instructions. You just want to make sure you go back and repeat that for any remaining hardware that you have. At this point we want to grab our latching mechanism. On the one side you'll find it's kind of got a curved knob. On the other we'll have our lock. You want to make sure the lock's on the driver's side and that curved knob is on the passenger side. So we're going to take our safety chain loop on one side and our C-shaped bracket on the other. I'm just going to get a bolt in there to kind of make it a little bit easier to lift all of these components. We want to line up the 2 holes in the mechanism along with the 2 holes in the bracket. We want to pass the bolt all the way through. I'm going to take another one of our safety chain connection points, slide it over, make sure it's going all the way over that bolt. And we'll take a nylon lock nut and loosely get it in place. And then we just want to take our other bolt and go through that entire assembly, making sure it's going through the outer brackets, this latching mechanism, and the safety chain loops. So it should be, if you're looking from the passenger side going towards the driver's side, we should have our C-shaped bracket, which is going to hold our 7-way. Then we should have our safety chain loop. Then in between our hitch, we should have our latching mechanism. Then on the outside of the hitch, we'll have our other safety chain connection point. And then finally, we're going to secure all of that down with a hex nut on each one of the bolts. So now we want to grab a 19mm wrench and socket or a 3/4 inch wrench and socket, and we're going to tighten up both of those bolts. Now you do want to make sure you come back with the torque wrench. We're going to torque those bolts down to the specified amount in the instructions. You just do want to pay attention because they are going to have a different torque value than the hitch itself. So now we need to move to our fascia. It should still be off the car. If we look at the very bottom where we have that opening, just to the right of that, if you're looking at it, we're going to have this panel that's holding on our sensor for our lift gate. We need to remove that whole panel. So you can actually just take that panel and slide it over towards that opening. Just slide it over. There's some notches that'll allow it to come out. And once you have it out, we want to remove the center plug. Just push in on the tab, release it, then we just work those clips out of the holder so that we can get the wire to come off and stay on the fascia. So now with the holder removed, I went ahead and marked out the area that we need to trim. Now they do give you a diagram in your instructions, but essentially if we come from that large opening, we're going to want to go straight across just a little bit over about 1.5 inches or so from the edge of those mounting tabs. And then we're just going to make a nice big square hole. So we're going to cut this material out. Now whenever you're cutting it, you can use just about whatever you have. It is just plastic, but I'm going to be using a rotary tool just so I can make a quick, clean cut. And then we can always come back and file down the edges if we have any sharp edges on there. So even though it's on the bottom, we don't want to leave all this excess plastic and kind of little shreds of plastic on there. So you just take a file, kind of go over the edges. It'll take off that excess plastic pretty easy, give us a nice smooth surface. So now that we have that trimmed out and cleaned up, we need to come back to the panel that's holding the kick wand. And you're going to notice that we actually have 2 wands on there, the 2 plugs. We need to mark these because we have to pull them out, but we want to make sure they go back into the proper position. We don't want this lower one up here and vice versa. So you just take a marker. I'm going to mark the lower one. Just put a line on it, going across. That way I know this is the lower one. And I'm just going to leave the top one with no marks on it. That way it's easily deciphered which one is which. Once we have them marked out, I'm just going to take the wand itself and start unclipping it until we can get the whole wand out of the holder. Start working our way around, unclipping everything. Now we want to get the module out too, so we're going to press on this tab here and just lift up, and we'll set this aside for right now. So now that we have the module removed, took a few measurements, and again these are going to be in your instructions, but you want to measure over, and we're going to make a straight line and cut this end section off. At the same time though, on the very corner here, we want to trim that just a little notch off the corner. So again, I'm going to be using a rotary tool. Just make a quick clean cut and cut out those sections. Now that we have that trimmed, we want to flip our kick wand over. So this is going to be the side that was actually facing the car when we originally took it off like this. And now we have a total of 4 holes that we need to drill. The 2 on the top section, basically you want to drill a hole pretty close to the corner here, and then about, I don't know, midway through in this open area here, you want to put one directly above the actual clip that holds the module in the center, and then one in the center on this lower portion. I'm just going to use a 5/16 drill and bit, and we just want to drill all 4 of those holes out. So now we want to take our kick wand module, we're going to slide it back into that clip it back in place. Now we want to get the rest of our wands back in as well. Now obviously we don't have all the material left because we trimmed it off. So we just want to get as much of the wand clipped in place as we can. And we're going to tie up the excess over here in the corner. We want to put both the wands back in, and again, just try to remember which one you marked. Top one goes on the top, lower one goes on the lower section, and again, it is going to stick out past the holder, but we just want to get it clipped back in place. Now since we ended up trimming our panel here, you'll find out real quick that the holder's not going to hold the wands in place very well, but that's why we drilled those holes. It'll allow us to use a zip tie, and then we can zip tie the harness and that wand right to the outside of the panel. We will have a little bit of excess wire here over on the side, but we can always tie these up. But we want to make sure this fits and gets in place properly before we tie everything up. That way we can see how much we actually need. But we'll move our center wire just out of the way for now. And if we look at that second set of notches towards the back, we're going to have 2 square holes. We want to line up that hole we drilled with that larger rectangular hole towards the side. So we'll take our wand and everything, and again, kind of need to play with how it's going to sit in there. But we want to line that hole up to where it's going to line up with the hole that we drilled in our bracket. But once we get it lined up and our bracket is nice and even with the hole that we cut and the wands are extending out past that opening, we're going to take one of the nylon bolts coming from the outside. We're going to pass it through. It may be a little bit easier if you remove the module while you're at least attaching it. Just kind of push it out of the way. You can see where that bolt's going to come through. And again, line up the bracket. And we're going to take a nylon nut and secure it down from the back side. Now these are nylon, so we don't really need to crank on them. You just want to use your fingers to try to get it nice and snug, and then double check that it's not going to move around. So once that nut is on there, the panel's nice and snug, we'll clip our module back in place. Make sure it gets all the way in there and that tab's all the way over. Then we can plug in that center plug, reattach the clips, and now we can take all the excess wire and kind of bundle it up here, make sure it stays away from our exhaust on the other side. Now before we can put our fascia back in place, we want to get the wiring in. That way it's a lot easier to route everything and get it down and wire it up. So the first thing we want to do is pull out all the floor coverings that are in there. So if you have a mat, even this center piece, you're going to want to pull that out too. Just lift up. We'll pull panel out and set it aside. So now right on the inside of our hatch, on the passenger side, we're going to have this tie-down hook. We need to remove that, so we're going to open up the hook, and there's a really small notch. It's going to open up the cover I'm going to pop that cover open. And that'll expose the bolt underneath that's holding it in place. I'll grab a 10mm socket, take the bolt out, and that'll allow us to take the threshold out. So we'll move to the other side, pull that bolt out as well. Now if we come to the threshold itself, if we just come right on the inside ledge here, we're going to have two bolts, one on either side of the latch mechanism. Those are going to be 8mm head bolts, so we want to grab an 8mm socket and pull both of those out. We want to grab the threshold at the bottom. You're going to lift up slightly. You do want to be careful because we do have a sensor on the driver's side. You can see right here. So we want to squeeze the tab on the sensor. That way we can disconnect it. You do kind of want to be careful because it is just clipped in, so you don't want to pull too hard. Maybe hold the sensor while you're pulling the plug out. But we'll set our threshold panel aside. So now we need to get access to the wiring that's going to be behind each one of these panels. So instead of pulling out the rails that are on the floor and removing all of the panels, we can actually get access if we just come right to the corner here. If we kind of lift up and outward, you may want to use a trim panel tool. We can get at least a piece of the panel started popping loose. And then you want to lift up because there is a slight lip at the bottom here. But if we lift up, we can get that panel loose enough to where we can get plenty of room to get access back here. Now you do want to be careful because we have quite a few sensors back here. So you either want to disconnect those or not pull the panel too far away. But we're going to go ahead and pull the panel loose on the passenger. But we're going to go ahead and pull the panel loose on the driver's side as well. So now if we move back to the outside, right below our taillight, we're going to have this large rubber grommet. We're going to pull that grommet out, and this is going to give us really easy access to get our wiring in and out of the vehicle. Because if I reach in to the hatch area, you can see I can easily get the wiring in. So we want to grab our harness and we can start feeding our wires through. So we want to start with the end that has the rubber or plastic sheathing on it. It's just got the blunt cut wires coming off. We're going to take this end, start from the inside, and feed it out this hole, and we're going to go towards the receiver tube where we have our bracket mounted. I'll pull some of the slack through. I'm going to route mine so it's underneath this plastic panel. Hold on to the grommet, because we can actually get this put back in place so we don't have to worry about any leaks. But again, we're just going to route this underneath that plastic panel so it doesn't interfere with anything. When we go to put the fascia back on, we go behind the bumper, behind the hitch. We want to at least get the wiring down towards the receiver tube where we have that bracket with the slotted holes. Now to get our grommet back in place so that we're not crushing the wire, I'm actually just going to cut a slit in the grommet to about the center. And we can even take a little bit out to make room for the wiring. Just make a little triangle cut or an X, something like that. And then we want to just open it up. We're going to slide the wire into the center of the grommet and then push the grommet back in place. Now obviously there is a cut in there, but I'm going to come back, put a little bit of silicone on there and seal it up. We don't have to worry about any kind of exhaust leaks or anything else getting to the inside. So now that we got our wires at least routed to there, we can start wiring up our plug. Now on each side of the plug, we're going to have these two screws. Got a Phillips screwdriver, we're going to loosen them up. That way we can access to the terminals on the back side and start wiring everything in. So at this point you kind of want to open up the plug, and I usually just take the same screwdriver I used, come in from the back, and you're going to push that plug out. So with the plug removed, we'll take our wires, we're going to feed them in from the back. You want to feed them in a good ways so that we have room to work with the wires. We don't have to fight that door the whole time. So we just kind of let it go. That way we, again, have room to work with our wires, and we'll grab the socket. Now we're going to strip back each wire just enough so we can get them in the terminals. Now if we grab the socket itself, we look at the back of the terminals. Each one of them is going to be labeled. If we start at the top corner here, you can see that it says ED, that's going to be for electric brakes, that's the blue wire. Go over RT for right turn, that's going to be the green wire. AUX is for auxiliary, that's going to be the black wire. TM is trailer marker, that's going to be the brown wire. LT for left turn, that's going to be the yellow wire. And we'll have GD for ground, that's going to be the white wire. And then finally in the center, we're going to have one leftover wire, and that's going to be the purple wire. So you want to grab yourself a Phillips head screwdriver. I'm going to loosen up these terminals. I'd suggest that you don't take them out all the way. You just loosen up that screw to where it's really loose, because they're extremely easy to lose, and we don't want to drop those and end up losing them. But this is the electric brake, so we're going to take our blue wire. We want to stick it into the terminal. Make sure you don't have any loose strands that'll potentially cross over. Put it behind that plate. Then we're going to tighten up that screw so it cinches down on the wire. We just want to go through, continuing to hook up all of our wires until we have all 7 wires in the terminals. So once you get your socket all wired up, you want to push the socket back in to the holder. Now they're only going to go in one way to fully seat. We want to line up those notches on the inside with the holes so then we get the set screws back in place. Now again, it's only going to go in one way, so we just want to make sure we get it in correct so that our pins are in this right spot when we go to plug everything up. Once you have it in place, you put those set screws back. I'll prevent the socket from coming out. And on the back here, we're going to have another screw. That's going to control this little gate. And what that's going to do is that's going to prevent the wires from being pulled. So we just want to take a Phillips screwdriver, just tighten this down. It doesn't need to be super tight. We just want a little bit of tension so that the wires on the inside don't get pulled, they don't get pulled out. You can see that little gate's just kind of going down onto the wires, and again, it'll kind of create an anchor point, preventing the wires from getting pulled on. So we're going to grab the bracket out of our kit. We're going to slide, there's a little slit in there, we want to slide the wires through so we can get our socket lined up. Now I'm going to put it to where my door, the lip on the door is facing towards the back. So you just want to line up the holes on the plug, line up the holes in the socket. Then we can take the included hardware, some Phillips screws, go through the bracket, through the plug, and secure it down with these locking nuts on the back. We'll do that for all 4 locations on the plug. Make sure these screws and nuts are nice and snug. Now these are locking nuts, so you should be able to just kind of hold it with your finger and snug them up with a Phillips screwdriver. So now we want to take our bracket, and you remember that slotted bracket that we had on our hitch here by the block. We want to line that up with our 7-way bracket so that we can mount our 7-way right next to the receiver tube here. So we're going to have some hardware in our kit. Take a longer bolt and a flat washer. I'm going to go through the bracket just to make it easier on myself. Pass it through. Pass the bracket over. And take a star washer. Slide it over the screw. Then we can take a hex nut and loosely get that in place. And then because of the limited space, I'm going to use a Phillips driver and an 8mm socket to tighten up those screws. Make sure that bracket's nice and secure. Now that we have the plug mounted on the outside, we have our wires routed in, you can take that excess wire, bring it back to the inside. It's a lot easier to tie up the excess behind this panel than it would be on the outside. But we want to come to our converter box here, and we want to start with the black, white, and yellow wire. And all three of these need to route along the back of the threshold and get to the pocket behind the driver's side panel here. We don't necessarily need to hook anything up, but again, we want to route everything, so maybe take some zip ties and tie it along the threshold here to some existing wiring. That way it's nice and protected and it won't interfere when we put the threshold back in. But again, we want to get the black, white, and yellow wires at least over here in this pocket. Now I went ahead and turned on my left turn signal, and we're going to come to the driver's side behind that panel, and we're going to start testing to see which one of the wires back here is our left-hand turn signal wire. So I already went in and got the wires loose, but on the driver's side, if we find this white tube, the wiring that's really close to it, right next to it, is going to be the wiring we're going to be using. And if you look in your instructions, they do tell you that it's a yellow wire with a purple stripe. But we do want to test this to make sure that the manufacturer hasn't changed the color wires on us. Now you can use a multimeter or a test light. Most multimeters aren't going to be fast enough to pick up the signal on the turn signal. So I'm going to use a test light. And here we can see that my test light's lighting up with the turn signal. So that's going to be the wire for the left-hand side for the left turn signal, which is going to be that yellow wire that we routed over here. Now I went ahead and turned on the right turn signal so we can test the wires over here. Now the bundle of wires we're going to be looking for is, if we come to the edge here, you'll see that it kind of goes out to the body right here. This bundle of wire is the one we want to look for. Now again, the turn signal wire is going to be a yellow wire with a purple stripe, just like the other side. So we're going to go ahead and test this wire and make sure that this is our right-hand turn signal. So again, the yellow wire with the purple stripe on the right-hand side is going to be our right turn signal. Now we're going to turn our turn signals off, and we're going to be looking for the taillight wire, which should be a brown wire over on the passenger side over here. So on the right hand side in that same bundle, we're going to be looking for a solid brown wire, and that's going to be the wire for our taillights, which will also hook to the brown wire coming off the harness. Now at this point, you want to turn your taillights off, your turn signals, and you want to have an extra set of hands press on the brake or put something on the brake pedal so it will activate the brake lights. And this time it's going to be the yellow wire. It's a solid yellow wire in that same bundle over on the passenger side. This yellow wire is going to hook to the red wire coming from our harness. So we're going to start over on the driver's side making all of our connections. We want to start by grabbing one of the quick splices out of our kit. You'll notice it's got two little channels in there. We want to slide the factory wire into one of the channels. So we're going to put our wire inside that channel. We're going to take the other wire from our harness, make sure it goes into the other channel. We want to close the cover over the wires. We'll at least partially close, hold them in there. We want to grab a pair of pliers, and we're going to squeeze that connector until it fully closes. It'll pierce the wires. You can see it makes a really nice solid connection. Now I always like to go back and I'm going to tape these up. One, because there's a little bit of the end sticking out there. We don't want to cause any kind of arcing issues. So I'm going to tape this up. It'll help keep it in place and cover that up. Now the rest of our wires are going to hook up the same way, just using those quick splices, but except we're going to have our green wire hooked to the right turn signal, our red wire hooked to the brake, and our brown wire hooked to the taillight signal on the passenger side. So we should have two more wires left that aren't hooked up, and this is going to be our black and white wires. And we can put push the black wire to the side for now, and we can bring our attention to the white wire. Now we don't need all of this length, because if we look down right at the corner, there's going to be a ground screw there. That's a really good spot to hook our ground up. But again, we don't need all this slack, so I'm just going to take a little bit of the excess, trim it off. I'm going to strip back the end of it. In your kit, they're going to provide you with a terminal. It's not exactly a ring, but it makes it really easy to get the ground in place. So we'll just slide our wire over and crimp it down. Now, if we come back to that bolt where our factory ground is, we can loosen up the bolt and take a 12mm socket. The nice thing is since it's not exactly a ring, we should be able to slide that terminal around the stud and then tighten it back down. You can remove it, pull it all the way out, make sure that that terminal is fully seated on there, but so long as it's going around the stud, it'll be fine. Then we just want to tighten it down. Make sure that terminal is nice and secure, it's not moving around on us. But now we can bring our attention to the black wire. Now this, you just want to make sure that it gets routed into the battery compartment area. Once it gets in there, it's really not important of how you route it. You just want to make sure you have enough room to get around the battery and to go towards the front, because right where we have our cables coming in at, that's where we need to get access to. There's a little tab over here. If we lift up on that tab, kind of pull up, it'll expose the positive post, but we don't want to hook this directly to the battery. You want to make sure you grab the fuse holder out of your kit, and before we hook it up, you want to take the fuse out because we don't want to blow it or cause any shorts. So we'll pull the fuse out, we can loosen up that nut and get our wires hooked up. So we'll strip back the end of our wire, grab our fuse holder, find the open end of our butt connector, put our wire in and crimp it down. We want to grab a 13mm socket. We're going to remove the nut. We can take our ring terminal, make sure it goes over. I like to run the wire along the same path, that way we can get that cover back in place without it interfering. Just make sure you put the nut back on, and if any of the wires came off, make sure you put them back on as well. But now that we have our power, ground, and all of our lighting connections hooked up, we'll take our fuse, put it into the fuse holder. And now would be a good time to test our wiring to make sure that it is functioning before we put all the panels back in place. Now, also coming off your converter box, you're going to have a purple and a blue wire. The purple wire is going to be your reverse signal, and the blue wire is going to be the brake output signal if you had a brake controller. But in our application, we're not hooking up the reverse wire, and the brake controller we have doesn't use this type of signal, so these wires are not going to get hooked up. So we're just going to clean up all these wires and tie them back behind this panel. So I went ahead and hooked to my tester, and if we look at the top right hand meter where it says voltage, we can see that we are getting voltage back there, so our power source is working. And if I start running to the lights, you can see that my clearance lights are working, the left turn signal, the right turn signal, and our brakes and both turn signals. So now that we know that our wiring is working, we want to take a little bit of time. You want to mount your converter box out of the way behind the panel, secure any loose wires again behind the panels, and then the wires going along the edge here, we have some factory wiring that's tucked down pretty far. Again, that'd be a really good spot to tie all these loose wires up and just clean everything up a little bit, and we can start putting all of the panels back in place. Now with the next set of hands, we're going to get ready to put our fascia back in place, but you don't want to forget to plug that plug in on the passenger side. I like to get the sides clipped in. That way I know it's not going to come off and we don't have to worry about it falling or anything. Now it's just a matter of putting all the hardware back in place in reverse order. So we're just going to start putting all the fasteners in. Now these push pins are a little weird to work with. Since we had to push the center in, we want to come to the back and pop it out so it's sticking out. And to make sure it's still sticking out, we're going to put the base in and then we'll push down on the center to where it's flush and it'll lock it in place. Once you have that last bolt in and all the panels back in place, that'll finish up your installation and your look at the Stealth Hitch on our 2019 Volvo V60.